can compassion turn suspicion into a miracle? In a bustling diner, an elderly man, worn and weary, stumbles in with his shivering granddaughter, Mia. Desperation drives him to ask for a simple meal, only to be met with harsh accusations from the stern owner. But then, a waitress named Sarah steps in with an act of kindness that leaves everyone speechless. The bell above the diner's door chimed softly as an elderly man, frail and weary, stumbled into the warm, bustling room. He cradled a small girl in his arms, her tiny fingers clutching his worn-out coat. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mixing with the hum of conversation and the clinking of cutlery. The man, Mr. James, looked around with eyes full of sadness but also a glimmer of hope. His granddaughter, Mia, was pale and shivering, her face tucked into his chest. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to take the next step, and approached the counter. The diner's owner, Mr. Wilson, stood behind the counter, wiping a glass with a dish towel. He was a stern man with a suspicious nature, his eyes narrowing as he noticed James's tattered clothes and the desperation in his posture. "What do you want?" Mr. Wilson barked, his voice cutting through the din of the diner. Conversations halted, and heads turned to watch the unfolding scene. James's voice trembled as he responded, "Please, just a little food for my granddaughter." Mr. Wilson's eyes narrowed further, suspicion evident in his gaze. "You think you can waltz in here and steal from me?" he shouted, causing a hush to fall over the diner. Patrons whispered among themselves, some looking on with disdain, others with pity. James, with tears in his eyes, tried to explain, "I promise, I don't mean any harm. She hasn't eaten in days." The tension in the diner was palpable. Everyone awaited Mr. Wilson's reaction, their eyes flicking between the elderly man and the stern owner. Just as Mr. Wilson opened his mouth to respond, a new voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Wilson, let me handle this," said Sarah, a kind-hearted waitress who had been working at the diner for years. She had been observing the scene from behind the counter, her heart aching for the man and his granddaughter. Sarah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on James's shoulder. Without waiting for a response from Mr. Wilson, she guided James and Mia to a booth in the corner of the diner. She fetched a warm blanket from a nearby shelf and wrapped it around the little girl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly, kneeling down to Mia's level. "Mia," the girl whispered back, her eyes wide with gratitude and exhaustion. Sarah smiled warmly. "Well, Mia, we're going to get you something to eat, okay?" She returned to the counter and soon came back with a steaming bowl of soup and some bread, placing it in front of Mia. "Eat up, honey," she encouraged. As Mia began to eat, James watched her with a mix of relief and sorrow. His face was etched with lines of worry and fatigue. Sarah took a seat across from him, her expression gentle and compassionate. "Tell me what's going on," she urged softly. James took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice low and filled with emotion. "I lost my job a few months ago. We were evicted from our home not long after. We've been wandering the streets, trying to find shelter and food. It's been so hard, and Mia, she's all I have left." Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for the struggle they had endured. She glanced at Mr. Wilson, who was still watching from behind the counter, his expression unreadable. "You see, Mr. Wilson," Sarah began, raising her voice slightly so he could hear, "not everyone who looks poor is a thief. Some are just down on their luck." Mr. Wilson's eyes softened as he took in the scene before him. He saw the sincerity in James's eyes, the kindness in Sarah's actions, and the desperate need of the little girl who was now eating hungrily. He took a deep breath and walked over to the booth, the room falling silent once more as everyone watched. "I'm sorry," Mr. Wilson said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "I shouldn't have judged you." James looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude and surprise. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you so much." Mr. Wilson reached into his pocket and pulled out some money, placing it on the table. "This should help you get back on your feet," he said quietly. Sarah, inspired by Mr. Wilson's change of heart, looked at James and said, "We could use a hand around here." There's a spare room in the back where you two can stay for now. It's not much, but it's warm and safe." Tears of gratitude filled James's eyes as he clutched Mia close. "Thank you," he whispered again, his voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you so much." The patrons of the diner, moved by the turn of events, began to chip in to help. One by one, they offered clothes, toys for Mia, and more food. The atmosphere in the diner shifted from suspicion to compassion, a new sense of community and warmth spreading among the people. The bell above the door chimed softly once more as the last patron left, the diner now quieter but filled with a sense of hope and kindness. Mr. Wilson, Sarah, and the rest of the staff looked at James and Mia, who were now resting in the booth, their ordeal momentarily eased by the generosity of strangers. The story leaves viewers with a warm feeling, showing that empathy and understanding can bridge the gap between strangers, turning suspicion into generosity and giving hope to those in need. The following morning, the soft light of dawn filtered through the diner's windows, casting a warm glow on the tables and counters. The diner was still waking up, the early morning quiet only broken by the sound of coffee being brewed and the sizzling of bacon on the griddle. Mr. Wilson stood behind the counter, preparing for the day ahead, while Sarah busied herself with setting tables. In the back of the diner, in a small, cozy room, James and Mia were waking up. The room was modest, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a small dresser, but it was warm and safe. Mia stretched and yawned, her eyes still heavy with sleep. James watched her with a tender smile, grateful for the shelter they had been given. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said softly. "Good morning, Grandpa," Mia replied, her voice still groggy. She looked around the room, her eyes wide with wonder. "Are we staying here now?" "For a little while," James replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thanks to Miss Sarah and Mr. Wilson, we have a place to stay and food to eat." Mia smiled, her face lighting up with a joy that had been absent for far too long. "I'm so happy, Grandpa. I like it here." James felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the simple happiness in Mia's words. He hugged her close, silently vowing to do everything in his power to make sure she never had to feel the fear and hunger they had experienced again. As they made their way to the front of the diner, they were greeted by the comforting smells of breakfast. Sarah looked up from her work and smiled warmly at them. "Good morning, you two," she said cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, we did." "Thank you so much, Sarah," James replied gratefully. "Come on, have a seat," she said, guiding them to a booth. "I'll get you some breakfast." James and Mia settled into the booth, the warmth of the diner wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. As they waited, James glanced around, taking in the diner's early morning activity. A few regulars had already arrived, sipping their coffee and reading newspapers, the usual routine of their day. Sarah returned with plates of pancakes, scrambled eggs, and bacon, placing them in front of James and Mia. "Here you go. Eat up, there's plenty more if you're still hungry." Mia's eyes widened at the sight of the food, and she eagerly began to eat. James watched her with a smile, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. As he took a bite of his own breakfast, he couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for Sarah and Mr. Wilson's kindness. However, not everyone in the diner was as welcoming. As the morning rush began, more patrons filled the diner, and whispers started to spread. Some of the regulars, familiar with Mr. Wilson's cautious nature, eyed James with suspicion, their hushed conversations filled with assumptions and judgments. "Did you hear about the old man and the girl? They just showed up out of nowhere," one patron whispered to another. "I bet he's just here to take advantage of Mr. Wilson's generosity," another replied. James couldn't help but overhear some of the whispers, and he felt a pang of hurt. He kept his head down, focusing on his food and trying to ignore the judgmental stares. But the weight of their suspicion was hard to bear. Sarah noticed the change in James's demeanor and the glances being cast his way. She walked over to the booth, a reassuring smile on her face. "Is everything okay, James?" she asked softly. James looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. I'm I don't want to cause any trouble. I appreciate everything you've done for us, but I can hear what people are saying." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. People can be quick to judge, especially when they don't know the full story. But don't let that get to you. You and Mia deserve to be here just as much as anyone else. James nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. But the lingering doubts and fears gnawed at him, making it hard to fully relax. He glanced over at Mr. Wilson, who was busy with a new wave of customers, hoping the diner's owner would continue to show the same kindness he had the day before. As the morning wore on, the diner grew busier, and James found himself feeling more out of place. The whispers and glances seemed to follow him, a constant reminder of how easily people could judge based on appearances. He knew he had to find a way to prove himself, to show that he was not a burden or a thief, but a man trying to take care of his granddaughter. Sarah, sensing his unease, decided to take matters into her own hands. During a lull in the rush, she approached Mr. Wilson, who was refilling coffee cups at the counter. "Mr. Wilson, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, her voice firm but respectful. Mr. Wilson looked up, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Sure, Sarah. What's on your mind?" She glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot before speaking. "It's about James and Mia. I know some of the regulars are talking, making assumptions about them. But I believe they're good people who just need a little help to get back on their feet." Mr. Wilson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know, Sarah. It's just, times are tough, and people are wary. But I can't deny that they seem genuine. I just don't want to be taken advantage of." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her eyes earnest. "I understand your concerns, but I think we should give them a chance. Maybe we could find a way for James to help out around here, show everyone that he's willing to work for what he's been given." Mr. Wilson considered her words, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Sarah. Let's give it a shot. I'll talk to James and see if he's up for helping out. Maybe that will ease some of the tension." With a plan in mind, Sarah felt a sense of relief. She returned to James's booth, her smile bright and reassuring. "James, I spoke with Mr. Wilson. How would you feel about helping out around the diner? It could be a way to show everyone that you're here to contribute, not take advantage." James's eyes lit up with gratitude and determination. "I would love that, Sarah. Thank you. I'll do whatever I can to help." And so, as the morning turned into afternoon, James found himself behind the counter, learning the ropes from Mr. Wilson. The regulars watched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, but slowly, they began to see the truth in James's actions. He worked hard, his dedication and humility evident in every task he took on. Mia, meanwhile, played quietly in the back room, her laughter a welcome sound in the diner's walls. The whispers and glances began to fade, replaced by nods of approval and the occasional smile. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, James felt a glimmer of hope. As the day came to a close, the diner slowly emptied, leaving James, Mia, Sarah, and Mr. Wilson in the warm, comforting glow of the evening light. The challenges were far from over, but together, they faced them with renewed strength and a sense of community that transcended suspicion and doubt. The next few days at the diner marked a turning point for James and Mia. The initially skeptical regulars began to warm up to the pair, thanks to James's hard work and Sarah's unwavering support. As James settled into his new role, the bonds within the small community began to strengthen, weaving a narrative of acceptance and empathy. Early one morning, as the sun was just beginning to cast a golden hue over the quiet town, James was already at the diner, prepping for the day. The clatter of dishes and the soft hum of the coffee machine filled the room. Mia sat at a corner table, drawing quietly with crayons Sarah had given her, a small smile playing on her lips. Sarah entered the diner, her usual cheerful demeanor brightening the room. She walked over to Mia and admired the drawing. "That's beautiful, Mia. What are you drawing today?" Mia looked up, her eyes sparkling. "I'm drawing a picture of Grandpa and me at the park." I hope we can go there one day. Sarah's heart ached at the innocence and hope in Mia's voice. I'm sure you will, sweetheart, she said warmly. Maybe we'll all go together sometime. Turning her attention to James, who was busy stacking plates, she approached him with a cup of coffee. How's it going, James? James wiped his brow and smiled gratefully. It's going well, Sarah. I can't thank you enough for giving us this chance. Sarah waved off his gratitude with a smile. You're doing great, James. Everyone can see how hard you're working. As the morning progressed, the diner filled with the usual crowd. James moved efficiently, taking orders, cleaning tables, and making sure everything ran smoothly. The regulars, once weary, now greeted him with nods and smiles, their earlier suspicions fading away. One afternoon, as the lunch rush began to die down, an elderly couple entered the diner. They looked around, taking in the cozy atmosphere, and chose a booth near the window. Sarah approached them with her customary warmth. Good afternoon. What can I get you today? She asked, her notepad ready. The woman, her eyes crinkling with a kind smile, glanced at the menu. We'll have 2 specials and some coffee, please. Sarah nodded and went to place their order. James, noticing the new customers, made sure their table was spotless and their coffee hot. As he set the cups down, the elderly man looked up at him. Thank you, young man. We haven't been here in a while. Nice to see new faces. James smiled. It's my pleasure, sir. I'm just grateful to be here. The woman looked at him curiously. You're doing a fine job. Are you new in town? James hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. My granddaughter and I just recently found a place here. The woman's eyes softened. It's a good town. I hope you find it welcoming. As James moved to the next table, Sarah returned with their meals. The woman leaned closer to her husband. He seems like a good man. I wonder what brought him here. Sarah, overhearing, smiled as she cleared a nearby table. He is a good man. Just hit a rough patch, but he's working hard to turn things around. The couple nodded in understanding, their curiosity satisfied. As they enjoyed their meal, Sarah glanced around the diner, feeling a sense of pride. She knew how much this place meant to the community, and seeing James become part of it was heartening. Later that evening, as the dinner rush wound down, Mr. Wilson called James over. James, you've been doing a great job. I think it's time we talked about something more permanent. James's heart skipped a beat. Permanent, sir? Mr. Wilson nodded. You've proven yourself to be hardworking and trustworthy. How would you feel about staying on full-time? We can sort out a proper salary and make sure you and Mia are taken care of. James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. This means more to us than you can imagine. Mr. Wilson smiled, a rare but genuine expression. You've earned it, James. And I think having you and Mia around has been good for all of us. As the night drew to a close, Sarah and James sat at one of the booths, enjoying a quiet moment after a long day. The diner was empty now, the last few patrons having left minutes ago. Mia was dozing off on the bench beside James, her small head resting on his lap. You've really turned things around here, James, Sarah said, her voice filled with admiration. James looked at her, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and exhaustion. I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You've been a friend and a guardian angel to us. Sarah chuckled softly. Well, I believe everyone deserves a second chance. And you've shown everyone here that you're willing to work hard for it. James sighed, looking down at Mia's peaceful face. All I want is to give Mia a good life, to make sure she's safe and happy. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're doing a great job, James. And with Mr. Wilson offering you a full-time position, things will only get better from here. James nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope take root in his heart. I hope so, Sarah. I really do. Suddenly, the sound of the doorbell chimed, signaling a late-night visitor. Both James and Sarah turned to see who it was. A young woman, appearing slightly distressed, walked in. She had a toddler on her hip and carried a large bag over her shoulder. Sarah immediately stood up, her instincts kicking in. "Hello there. Can I help you with something?" she asked, her tone gentle and welcoming. The woman looked relieved. "Hi, I'm sorry to come in so late. We've been traveling all day and haven't had anything to eat." Sarah motioned for her to sit at a nearby booth. "Of course. Please, take a seat. We can whip something up for you right away." James stood up carefully, trying not to disturb Mia. "I'll get the kitchen started," he offered, heading to the back. As Sarah sat with the young woman, she noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the same weariness she had seen in James when he first arrived. "Where are you coming from?" Sarah asked, trying to make conversation. "We're coming from up north," the woman replied. "I've been trying to find work, but it's been tough." Sarah nodded empathetically. "I understand. You're welcome to rest here while we get you some food." James returned a few minutes later with 2 plates of scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon. He placed them on the table and smiled at the toddler, who looked at the food with wide, hungry eyes. "Here you go. This should help." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to us." Sarah and James exchanged a knowing glance, both remembering their own struggles. "It's no problem at all," Sarah said. "We've all been there." As the woman and her child ate, James and Sarah sat back down, watching the scene unfold. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared recognition of the hardships life could bring and the importance of kindness and community. After the meal, the woman, whose name was revealed to be Linda, thanked them profusely. "If there's any way I can repay you, please let me know." James shook his head. "Just pay it forward when you can. That's all we ask." Linda smiled, a hint of hope returning to her eyes. "I will. Thank you again." As Linda left the diner, Sarah looked at James, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "You know, this place has always been a part of the community. But people like you make it a family." James smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "I think we're all starting to find our place here." As they prepared to close up for the night, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the diner had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a haven for those in need, a place where people could find a second chance and the support they needed to start anew. James carried the sleeping Mia to the back room, tucking her in bed with care. He watched her for a moment, his heart filled with love and determination. He knew their journey was far from over, but with the support of their new friends, he felt ready to face whatever came next. As he turned off the light and closed the door, he whispered a silent promise to himself and to Mia. They would make it. They had found a home, a community, and the kindness of strangers who had become family. And with that, James felt a sense of peace settle over him, knowing that they were finally on the right path. In the quiet of the night, the diner stood as a beacon of hope, its lights a warm glow against the darkness, promising safety and compassion to all who entered. And for James and Mia, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with promise and the unshakable belief that better days were ahead. The days at the diner continued to blend into a comforting routine for James and Mia. With each passing day, they became more integrated into the fabric of the community. James worked tirelessly, his dedication evident in every task he undertook, while Mia brought a sense of innocence and joy to the diner that was contagious. One quiet afternoon, the usual hum of the diner was interrupted by the arrival of an unfamiliar figure. A man in his mid-30s, dressed in a worn suit, entered and looked around with an air of uncertainty. Sarah, ever observant, noticed him right away and approached with her usual welcoming smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" she asked, her tone friendly. The man hesitated before responding. "I was wondering if I could speak with Mr. Wilson. My name is Daniel, and I'm here on behalf of the city's outreach program." Sarah nodded, understanding the importance of such visits. "Of course, Mr. Wilson is in the back. I'll go get him for you," As Sarah went to fetch Mr. Wilson, Daniel took a seat at the counter. James, who had been wiping down tables, approached with a curious yet cautious demeanor. "Can I get you something to drink while you wait?" he offered. "A coffee would be great, thanks," Daniel replied, giving James a brief, polite smile. James prepared the coffee, trying to gauge the reason for Daniel's visit. There was something about the man that suggested his presence was more than a routine check-in. Mr. Wilson emerged from the back, his expression one of polite curiosity. "Daniel, nice to see you. What brings you here today?" Daniel stood up and shook Mr. Wilson's hand. "Good to see you too, Mr. Wilson. I wanted to discuss a few things about the outreach program and how we can better support our community." Mr. Wilson nodded, leading Daniel to a booth where they could talk more privately. As they conversed, James couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. He knew that discussions about community support often involved sensitive topics and potential changes that could affect everyone at the diner. A little later, as their conversation wrapped up, Mr. Wilson and Daniel walked back to the counter. "James," Mr. Wilson called, "can you join us for a moment?" James approached, wiping his hands on a towel, a slight tension in his stance. "Yes, Mr. Wilson?" Daniel smiled kindly at James. "I've heard a lot about you and the hard work you've been doing here. I wanted to see if there's any way we can assist you and Mia through our outreach services." James was taken aback by the offer. "That's very kind of you, but we're managing okay now. The job here has made a huge difference." Mr. Wilson nodded in agreement. James has been an incredible asset to the diner. But Daniel has some resources that might make things a bit easier for you and Mia. James looked at Daniel, considering the offer. "What kind of resources?" "Well," Daniel began, "we can help with things like housing support, legal advice, and even educational programs for Mia. We want to make sure you have everything you need to build a stable future." James felt a surge of hope at the prospect of additional support. "That sounds wonderful. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to provide a better life for Mia." Daniel nodded, pleased with James's response. "I'll leave some information with Mr. Wilson, and you can go over it when you have time. If you decide to take us up on the offer, just give me a call." As Daniel left the diner, James felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The idea of having more support was comforting, but he also felt a deep sense of responsibility to make the most of the opportunities being offered. Later that evening, as the diner quieted down and the last few customers trickled out, James and Sarah found a moment to talk. Mia was drawing at a nearby table, lost in her own world of colors and imagination. "You handled that really well today," Sarah said, her voice filled with admiration. James shrugged modestly. "I just want what's best for Mia. If that means accepting help, then I'm all for it." Sarah smiled. "You're doing an amazing job, James. And don't forget, you've got a whole community here to support you." James nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm starting to see that. It's a good feeling, knowing we're not alone." As they continued to talk, Mr. Wilson approached, carrying a stack of papers. "James, these are the forms Daniel left. I thought we could go over them together." James looked at the papers, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate all your help." Mr. Wilson smiled warmly. "We're in this together, James. This diner is more than just a business, it's a family. And family looks out for each other." They spent the next hour reviewing the forms, discussing the different types of support available and how to apply for them. Sarah joined in, her practical insights proving invaluable. By the end of the evening, James felt more informed and optimistic about the future. As they wrapped up, Mia approached, holding her latest drawing. "Look, Grandpa. I drew us all at the diner." James took the drawing, his heart swelling with pride. "It's beautiful, Mia. Just like our family here." Sarah and Mr. Wilson looked at the drawing, smiling at the depiction of their little community. "We're glad to have you both here," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. As the night came to a close, James felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been difficult, but with the support of his new friends, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that with hard work, determination, and a little help from his community, he could build a brighter future for himself and Mia. And so, as the lights of the diner dimmed, the bonds of their newfound family grew stronger, weaving a tapestry of hope and resilience that would carry them through the days to come. The following weeks saw James and Mia settle even more comfortably into their new life. James had become a fixture at the diner, his presence a reassuring constant for the regulars and staff alike. He worked diligently, earning the respect and friendship of everyone around him, while Mia's laughter and drawings brightened the place each day. One sunny afternoon, the diner was particularly busy. The buzz of conversation, clinking of dishes, and the rich aroma of food created a lively atmosphere. James was in his element, moving swiftly from table to table, ensuring everyone was well taken care of. Mia sat at her usual corner table, her crayons scattered around as she worked on another masterpiece. Sarah was behind the counter, her cheerful demeanor never wavering despite the rush. Mr. Wilson, too, was in high spirits, his stern exterior having softened considerably over the past few months. The community had come to see the diner as more than just a place to eat, it was a haven, a testament to the power of kindness and perseverance. As the lunch rush began to wane, the doorbell chimed, and in walked Daniel, the outreach worker who had visited weeks before. James spotted him and immediately made his way over, a smile on his face. "Daniel, good to see you again. What brings you by?" James asked, shaking his hand warmly. Daniel returned the smile. "I just wanted to check in and see how things are going. I also have some news I think you'll be interested in." James led Daniel to a booth, signaling Sarah to bring over 2 coffees. "News? I'm intrigued. What's going on?" Daniel took a sip of his coffee before speaking. "Well, after our last meeting, I looked into a few more resources that could benefit you and Mia. There's a housing program specifically designed for families in transition, and I think you'd be a perfect candidate." James's eyes widened with hope. "Housing? That would be incredible. We've been comfortable here, but having a place of our own would mean the world to us." Daniel nodded. "I thought you might say that. I've already submitted an application on your behalf, and it was approved. There's an apartment ready for you, not too far from here." James felt a surge of emotion, his eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know what to say, Daniel. Thank you doesn't seem enough." Daniel smiled warmly. "You've earned this, James. Your hard work and dedication are an inspiration. And I know Mia will thrive in a stable home environment." James looked over at Mia, who was engrossed in her drawing. He couldn't wait to tell her the news. "This is going to change our lives. Thank you so much, Daniel." As they finished their coffee, Sarah joined them, curious about the conversation. "What's all the excitement about?" James beamed at her. "Daniel just told me we've been approved for a housing program. We have an apartment waiting for us." Sarah's face lit up with joy. "That's amazing news, James. I'm so happy for you and Mia." Mr. Wilson, overhearing the conversation, walked over and clapped a hand on James's shoulder. "Congratulations, James. You deserve this. And don't worry about the diner, you'll always have a place here." James felt overwhelmed by the support and kindness surrounding him. "Thank you, everyone. I couldn't have done this without you." Later that evening, as the diner closed and the last customers left, James gathered Mia in his arms. "Sweetheart, I have some wonderful news." Mia looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "What is it, Grandpa?" James smiled, his heart full. "We're going to have a place of our own. A real home where we can be together." Mia's face broke into a radiant smile. "Really, Grandpa? That's the best news ever." As they hugged tightly, Sarah and Mr. Wilson watched with tears in their eyes. It was a moment of pure joy and fulfillment, a testament to the power of community and the human spirit. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as James and Mia prepared to move into their new apartment. the entire diner community rallied around them, offering help with packing, transportation, and setting up their new home. It was a true team effort, with everyone pitching in to ensure the transition was smooth and joyful. On moving day, the apartment was filled with laughter and the sound of busy hands. Boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and a sense of warmth and belonging permeated the air. Mia ran from room to room, her excitement palpable as she explored their new home. As the last box was emptied and the apartment began to resemble a cozy, welcoming space, James took a moment to reflect. He stood in the living room, looking around at the life they were building. Sarah approached, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, James. You and Mia have a beautiful new home," she said softly. James nodded, his heart full. "We did it together, Sarah. I couldn't have done this without you and Mr. Wilson, and everyone at the diner." Sarah smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's what family is for." Later that evening, as the sun set and cast a golden glow over their new home, James and Mia sat on their small balcony, looking out at the world. Mia snuggled close to her grandfather, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "Grandpa, are we going to be happy here?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. James kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be very happy here. This is just the beginning of our new life, and it's going to be wonderful." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, James felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and challenging, but they had made it through, stronger and more resilient. Surrounded by the love and support of their community, James knew that they were finally home. In the quiet of the evening, with the city lights twinkling in the distance, the bond between grandfather and granddaughter grew even stronger. It was a heartwarming resolution, a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and the kindness of strangers who had become family. And in that moment, James knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, with hope and unwavering faith in the goodness of people.